Good morning, my fellow Vanguard Lions. I'm actually honored to be here, but I do have a script I need to follow because I have a strict timeline. I know you'd rather listen to me than go to class necessarily, but I'm under strict orders here, so I'm going to try to stick to this. So I'm going to actually refer to some notes here. This is my first time speaking to the Vanguard athletes as a whole. I've been out on the baseball field a number of times. But I'm excited because this opportunity really wasn't available to me years ago. So this is really exciting. But I want to start out with just a rhetorical question. This is really rhetorical. Nobody has to raise their hand, but I just want to ask how many here aspire to do something? How many people here in this audience have a dream? Another way I could ask that is, how many here know God's purpose for your life? And if you answered affirmatively in your mind, in your heart, in your thoughts, in any way, shape, or form to this, I just want to know, are you acting out in faith? Are you actually applying this in the form of true faith? And I asked this question primarily because of this, because I knew when I was 7 years old that I had a gift. I knew that I had a strong left arm. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do with it, but I just knew I had this strong left arm. Everybody was telling me that, all the feedback that I was getting. And I knew I had the love of baseball in my heart. To this day, actually, baseball's still in my blood. Jeff didn't tell you, and I'll tell you this right now, but I'm a professional baseball scout for the New York Mets. And I've been doing this now for the last 18 years. And this date predates my time that I played professionally as well. And I played till I was 13. So in a way, you could say this: I'm making a life out of my dream. That's why I asked you guys that question, because I really want you to focus on that, because that's really the focus of my story, where I'm going to end up heading in this. I also asked this question because I want you all to know that God has blessed you all with some unique individual talents. He's really gifted you with something. It's your job to try to figure out exactly what that is. But before I tell you how I ended up at Vanguard, before I tell you how Vanguard found me, I need to give you a little bit of a backdrop to my story. It is a little bit different. Jeff's right. I had a kid, and I was married when I was a freshman. And this is the backdrop to my story. I was a product of a broken home. I basically was raised by a single mom of 4. She was a factory worker. I grew up in Massachusetts. The graduating class of my school was 90. So we lived in what they call Section 8 apartment complex. When I was 7 years old, though, my grandfather was my mentor. He was my life. We used to talk about sports all the time, especially baseball. We were real big New England fans. So, not to diss the Southern California fans here, but that was my team growing up, was the Red Sox. But my grandfather died when I was 10 years old. And my siblings and I, we were raised Catholic. We went to catechism. We went to church one day a week. We went to catechism. And the reason why I'm mentioning that part of the story is because I do want you to know that I did have a fundamental foundation of knowing the difference between right and wrong. And I do want to credit the church at the time for giving me that, and as well as my mom, who raised 4 kids by herself. But soon after my grandfather died, my mom met a man and ultimately ended up marrying him. It wasn't long after that marriage, I'm about 10 years old, where there was trouble starting to brew in the home. And there were really big problems between my stepfather and my sister. I only have one. And then there started becoming real big problems between me and my stepfather. Without really going into the details, let me just tell you this. My sister was sexually abused. And we all were extremely emotionally abused. Like I said, without really getting into the details of all of this, we lived under these conditions for the next 6 years. Unfortunately, after those 6 years, as they say in the world, all hell started to break loose. One day I was so angry and I was so frustrated with this relationship that I had with him, and then I didn't know how to handle it. I was so young that I confronted him and told him that I knew what he was doing to my sister. But I was afraid of him. I was extremely afraid of this man. He was very, very intimidating. And after I confronted him, he came up to me one day and he whispered in my ear that I know how to kill a person with one finger. He was a Vietnam vet, and like I said, he was an extremely intimidating person. And from that point on, I can tell you I had a target on my back. I mean, I wasn't courageous, I was just angry. I was just frustrated. And I also didn't know how to handle it. So, you know, after having a really rough day, a typical rough day around the house, I went to bed one night with a knife under my pillow. I really wanted to kill this guy. And or I wanted to kill myself. I wasn't 100% sure exactly, you know, how to handle this whole situation, like I said. So this was about the first time in my life, I can honestly tell you, that I started to pray. Because I had these thoughts in my mind, I had these thoughts in my head that were extremely destructive. But for some reason, there was a real strong force that was telling me, don't do this, there's hope. But the problem was I just couldn't really get my fingers on it. So before I turned 15 years old, it started becoming really more clear to me that I wasn't wanted in his house. Besides the constant emotional abuse, he took away the one love that I had in my life. I'm a freshman in high school, and he took baseball away. He didn't let me play baseball my freshman or my sophomore year in high school. You know, and then at that point, I started becoming very rebellious. So I started making extremely bad choices. I mean, I started drinking before school. I started doing whatever drugs I can get my hands on. And I started stealing from my parents, my friends, and my neighbors. Eventually, on a cold, snowy day, I got arrested for breaking and entering into a neighbor's home. And I found myself in the back of a police pickup car in the middle of a school day. Not a good combination. Well, there I was now, 16 years old, and I felt like I had hit rock bottom. But for some odd reason, I can't quite get my fingers on it, I felt eerily relieved that I had got caught. As well, I thought, now maybe somebody will know what's going on in my home. Well, doing this comes with serious consequences. So we went to court, and I had to sit in front of a judge, and he asked me, he goes, Tim, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, I wanted to go back home and atone for my deeds. Now remember, I'm 16 years old, and I thought the alternative was I was going to go to jail. But I really knew by going home it really wasn't going to work out, but I didn't want to go to jail, so. And then he turns to my mom, and my mom quietly said, we don't think we can handle him. And as you guys might have guessed, that when he got to my stepfather, he was essentially said, he's not good, and he's not wanted in his home. So at 16 years old, ultimately, I was placed into the welfare state of Massachusetts foster care program. And I was provided with a probation officer who had the task of trying to find me a home, a permanent home, until I was 18 years old. I mean, there was many choices that he had, but I think God was watching over me, and I think you'll see why as I'm getting now to the better details of the story. Is he placed me on this 60-acre, 200-year-old farmhouse where the family there raised their own animals. I mean, we had horses, we had cows, we had pigs, we had chickens, we had sheep, we had everything. We lived off the land. We didn't even have oil in the house. We heated it by wood stove. I mean, it was so different than from where the projects that I had just come from. But I'm 40 miles away from where I had grown up. Remember when I told you that I started to pray for the first time in my life? Well, now I knew my prayers were being answered, because it turns out that I was placed into a Christian home. And that family that was living there, I mean, they had Bible studies. We went to coffee houses for music. We went on Friday nights, we went to watch Christian movies. And they prayed for me, and they gave me really good counsel. And ultimately, they even helped me with all that anger I had built up for 6 long years. To this day, guys, I still deal with anger. I still deal with frustration, and it's probably been my Achilles heel. But thank God that I was placed into this home, because they helped me so much, and they listened to me. They prayed for me, and like I said, and my eyes started to open up that God was starting to work something in my life. He started revealing himself. Truthfully, my foster family didn't throw this down my throat. They didn't force it down my throat, but they started praying for me. And they even encouraged me to go back to the high school team and try out for baseball. I didn't play my freshman and my sophomore year, so I tried out my junior year. I made the team. And even my senior year, I ultimately I was named co-MVP of the baseball team. Well, after I graduated, and I'm 18 years old now, ultimately I ended up, the state of Massachusetts stopped providing me with care, and they said, hey, Tim, you're on your own now. Side note, I got a side note here, is during those 2 years while I was living with that Christian family, they told me about this place in Southern California where they lived in the 60s called Calvary Chapel, right down the road from here. And wouldn't you know that 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, an opportunity opened up, a door opened. God opened up the door for me to move to Southern California. And of course, I had a one-way ticket right to Calvary Chapel. I was going to live as close to that place as I possibly could to try to grow in my Christian walk. I'm on my own. I had no family. I had no friends. I mean, it was just me and the world. Well, when I arrived, like I said, then I found out they had 6 or 7 nights of something going on at the church, and I found myself at that church 6 to 7 nights a week. But I started running out of money, very little that I had in my pocket. I'm 18 years old, and I needed a job. So somebody at Calvary Chapel told me about a restaurant in the South Coast Plaza called 40 Carats. It's not there now, but there's still a place there. And I went in there for an interview on a Tuesday. God, again, was looking out for me, because he knew I needed a job, and there was 3 interviews that day, and I ended up getting the job. So if I wasn't at Calvary Chapel, I was at 40 Carats. If I wasn't at 40 Carats, I was at Calvary Chapel. I worked as many shifts as I possibly could at 40 Carats, and I got to know a lot of the people there, and I made a lot of friendships there. But there was one person there that I really took very much notice of, and her name was Kelly. She was a waitress. And I really wish Kelly was here, because she's a huge part of my story. I liked her. She was a sophomore at Orange Coast College, and we were drawn to each other, like I said. And it wasn't long before I asked her out on a date. It took about 2 months for me to finally ask her out on a date, and she said yes. And then about 2 months after that, I asked her to marry me. It was that fast. I didn't waste any time. The only problem is she had to love me. And remember now, she's going to school. She's career-minded, career-oriented. She's thinking she's going to go get her education. And I dropped that on her. So she says, Tim, look, I think I love you. I think I love you, but, you know, we need to get to know each other. And so can I talk to my parents? And of course I said yes. And then she came back to me and said, my parents want to take us out to dinner. Well, anyways, I was pretty relentless about this, and I told her, yes, out of respect for you, Kelly, let's go to dinner. But I'm not going to let your parents talk us out of this. I was 18. I knew everything. Well, we went out to dinner. Her parents talked us into a different plan. They said, Tim, why don't you let Kelly go get her degree? As a matter of fact, you're 18. Why don't you go back to school and get your degree? I mean, it's logical, right? I mean, I get it, and I totally understood, and so we walked out, and I let them talk us out of it. So Kelly and I, we kept dating, kept going to church, and we kept falling deeper in love with each other. Well, Kelly and I did have a commitment to God. We did have a commitment to each other, but we also got tempted. And in that temptation, Kelly got pregnant. 6 months after dating her. So our lives were just about ready to dramatically change. Kelly had to go break the news to her parents. She had to drop out of school in her sophomore year. And I needed to get a real job because waiting on tables just wasn't going to cut it. I mean, I didn't have a degree, I didn't have a vocation, I didn't have a trade. I had no idea what I was even going to do. So everything totally switched. We switched plans. The one thing that I did know, though, I want to inject this part, is that I knew I loved Kelly. I knew it from the moment I met her. I knew God brought us together. So I found myself on my knees, and I'm praying to God for all the wisdom in the world and for any kind of direction, because I knew He saved this wretched man before. I knew He could do it again for me. Well, thankfully, Kelly did love me, and I loved her, and we got married when she was 3 months pregnant. So I'm not even a year out of high school. I'm not even a year removed from foster care, and Kelly and I are now married. And by the way, I'll give you the end of the story here, is that we're still married. Okay. She's in Huntington Beach right now with her parents, with her mom, who she's best friends with, and Kelly and I think I'm best friends with Kelly, but her mom seems to take front seat still too, but that's okay. Kelly's still with me. So anyways, Kelly and I, we went to work on trying to find a vocation for me. We had to find a trade. We had to find something for me to do. I had to get a real job. I mean, waiting on tables is not the deal. It wasn't going to cut it. But somebody at church was in the construction business and thought that, hey, look, Tim, you can make a pretty good career out of this. So they helped me get into an apprenticeship program. Truthfully, at the time, I never swung a hammer. I had never worked with my hands before. I was just a novice and complete. But I was officially on my way to becoming a carpenter in the construction field. So after Kelly and I, like I said, we got married. At this point, I'm working 5 days a week. I'm working part-time at 40 Carats. And I'm going to the apprenticeship program that they had on Saturdays for 8 hours a day. So my week was full. My life was full. Now I want to get into a very interesting part of my story, I believe, there's a God moment coming up here, and that is about a year and a half into now my construction, a year and a half removed from high school. I've got a year and a half old son, and I was 6-month-old son at this time. While I was working on a construction site during lunch, I saw this tennis ball. I mean, I don't know what was so mysterious about it, but something told me go pick it up. So I went to pick up this tennis ball, and I just chucked it as hard as I could. And my worker, my boss next to me said, hey, Tim, you have a cannon for an arm. So I went back over and I picked it up, and this time I came over and I said, I threw it as hard as I could, as far as I could, and my arm felt unbelievable. And it was almost as if I had an epiphany. It was almost as if I had this whisper in my ear that told me, Tim, go back to college and play baseball. Now, I went back home to tell Kelly this and told her that God wanted me to go to school and He wanted me to play baseball. Side note, in my 2 years with Kelly at this point, I had never spoken about baseball. I never picked a baseball up. I never watched baseball on TV. She had no idea I even played in high school. We never talked about it. It really was in the rearview mirror in my life. I mean, can you imagine the look on her face when I told her I wanted to go to college? I have a 6-month-old son, and her questions went something like this. She goes, Tim, how are we going to be able to afford this? I mean, what about the baby? What about me? And can you work, go to school, and play baseball? I mean, these are all good questions, right? Well, she decided to encourage me and said, okay, Tim, if this is what God wants you to do, I'm behind you. I mean, truthfully, honestly, at this point, what do you think my odds are? And besides the fact is that I'm in the middle of considering, this is the simple fact about baseball, is I'm living in the hottest bed of talent in the United States, and that's Southern California, where baseball players have a chance to play year-round. Looking back, Kelly and I were just naive enough to believe that this was possible, though. As a matter of fact, I'll refer to Luke 18:27 right now that says that what's impossible with man is very possible with God. But let me tell you, though, all my friends around me thought that I was absolutely nuts. They said, Tim, you're living a pipe dream. There's no way this is possible. Everybody wants to be a professional athlete. Well, at this point, after talking to a bunch of friends and talking to everybody about what I'm thinking and what I'm believing I'm supposed to do, they said, well, you need a college to go to, Tim. I mean, it's the only place you're going to get any type of recognition whatsoever for if you say that you're that good. So on a hot summer day, you got to picture this, I heard about Orange Coast College. I heard that they had a pretty good baseball program at that time. So on this hot summer day, I decided to go down there to talk to the head coach. And just picture this guy walking up to the coach who's sitting in the dugout, and I have a baby in one arm, and I have cleats and a glove in my other arm, my other hand. I mean, I'm not so sure he knew exactly what I was about to come talk to him about, but I'll let you visualize that on your own. So, and I do kind of laugh at this when I think about it. But he was nice enough that day, and he let me throw a bullpen. I was left-handed, so he's always interested in lefties. He said, yeah, you know, you have a good arm, Tim, but I'm not sure that this is going to work in the long run. Well, then again, he didn't tell me, don't show your face again. So I did keep my job in construction. I did keep my part-time job at the restaurant, and I did continue going to school on Saturdays. But I also found my time to get to practice on that baseball team, and I found myself getting to practice and getting to games, going to the games that were played. One day I approached Coach Maine because I noticed that I hadn't pitched in one game in 4 weeks. And so I approached Coach Maine again, and he said, you know what, Tim, to be perfectly honest with you, you know, I just don't have the innings for you. You're not going to make the team in the fall, and you're not going to make the team in the spring. He was pretty straightforward, and to this day I totally respect him for being just straightforward and candid with me. But he said, but I do have a team for you that takes guys like you, and they're the Orange County Giants. They play up at Glover Stadium. So long story short here is I called the coach. He said, I'll take you, Tim. I've got room for you. So anyways, for the first time in my marriage, Kelly came with me, and I had a chance to pitch. And Kelly was there. And her reaction was, she was horrified, she was depressed, and she was extremely shocked. I didn't throw any strikes whatsoever. The coaches are yelling at me from the dugout to throw strikes. I'm hitting hitters, and I'm walking everybody. I didn't make it out in the first inning. I mean, she wasn't an expert or anything, but she had a right to question what I was doing. So that ride home was pretty much, you know, Kelly just reminding me that, Tim, are you sure? Well, as the summer progressed, I did get a little bit better. And then one day, a coach came to watch the Orange County Giants, just in towards the end of that summer. And he had gone to my coach, and he said, hey, Coach Daniels, do you have a Christian on this team that wants to go to a Christian college? And he raised he pointed right towards me. Well, that night I pitched, a little bit better than the last time. And he came up to me after the game was over, and he approached me and said, hey, Tim, I'm the head coach at that time, it was called Southern California College. And we're looking for Christians that wants to, you know, play baseball at a Christian college. I mean, I was the perfect candidate. So unbeknownst to me at that time, by the way, you guys wouldn't know this, you're so young. At that time, baseball had been dropped from the program here. So he was a brand new coach who was recruiting players who was looking to start up their career, and that was me. So anyways, I ended up coming back here. So now picture this, guys. I'm a 21-year-old freshman at Vanguard College, and I showed some improvement during the fall, and then that following spring he gave me a chance to pitch against my first team, my first game ever in collegiate baseball, and it was against a nationally ranked Division I team. It was Pepperdine. So here's my line score. I pitched 5 innings, I gave up 9 runs, I walked 9 guys, I gave up 9 hits, but I struck out 9 guys, but we lost. And after we got back, Coach Emmerd came up to me and he said, you know, Tim, the coach over there, Coach Gorey, who brought his team to the College World Series in '79, he said, you have a pretty good team, Coach Emmerd. And he said, but I want to tell you something, your starting pitcher actually has a chance to play professional baseball someday. So Coach Emmerd delivered that message to me when he got back, and it encouraged me. And so the freshman year went by. It went by, and I had a lot of ups and downs, and mostly downs, but I was making a little bit of progress. Well, after my freshman year, I got a chance to go play on their summer league team. Coach Hoover from Golden West College saw me pitch, and he noticed that I had some talent, so he wanted me to come to school there, and I accepted. Side note, I left Vanguard without consulting God, and you'll see what happens here soon. But I also heard Major League Scouting Bureau was having a camp right across the street here at Orange Coast College, and there was some 200 or 300 players that went there. I mean, it looked like a cattle call, and I had heard about it, and I wanted to go showcase my arm. So I got there, I faced 5 hitters, I struck out all 5 guys, and he said, hey, I'll see you tomorrow. So the next day I came back. A scout from the Atlanta Braves came up to me and said, hey, Tim, we'd like to sign you to a professional contract. And I didn't know anything about baseball scouts. Here I am from this kid from back east, and here I am, a brand new ball player, just finished my freshman year. And I told him I needed to go home and talk to my wife. And, you know, I have to, you know, that's just not a normal thing that scouts are used to hearing, is that you're already married. And I told him I had a kid, but he didn't really blink. He just said, okay, just call me as soon as you can. Well, anyways, Kelly and I prayed about it that night. I called him back, and I told him that I just couldn't do this right now. And he asked me why I came to the camp, and I told him, I says, I really thought I needed to come here to open up the eyes of the scouts, but I wanted you to know I'm going to go to Golden West College, and you can come there and scout me. Coach Hoover told me that if I went there, then Division I schools will start to recruit me, and all the Major League Scouts will come and see me pitch. Well, I did go to Golden West, and remember, I did this all without consulting God. All 26 teams did recruit me. I don't think there was a Major League team I didn't speak to that fall. I filled out information cards, and I had Division I scholarship offers to Arizona State, Cal State Fullerton, Arizona, Texas, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Miami, and Oral Roberts. I had schools I never heard of. I've got a shoebox full of them at home. And ultimately what ended up happening in that process was I signed my letter of intent with Oral Roberts because of a former left-handed pitcher was their pitching coach. His name was Jim Brewer. He's passed away now. And I even signed a letter of intent to my home state, Cape Cod League, for the Chatham A's. And then in January of my sophomore year, when they used to have the Major League Baseball draft, I was the 9th player chosen in the United States. I mean, it all sounds good, right? Well, not so fast. It's true I was improving. It's true I was getting all this recognition. But I was also getting a big head. And I was thinking I was all that. So, I mean, every day I pitched, I mean, there must have been about 60 scouts, and there's only 26 teams. But they had double scouts there. They had cross-checkers. They had national guys there. They had scouting directors there. And I was giving them what they wanted, which was throw as hard as you can, and they wanted to see the radar guns light up. Well, Coach Hoover was getting frustrated with me because I really wasn't pitching for me, I was pitching for them. I wasn't pitching for the team, I was pitching for them. And I was starting to get a big head, and it was starting to become obvious to at least him. So then one day, late in that fall, I felt this sharp-shooting pain run right through my left shoulder. And I mean, I couldn't throw anymore. My arm just completely died. It just completely went kaput. I mean, every time I picked the ball, I couldn't raise my arm above my shoulder above my head. Side note, looking back, I'm going to tell you that my downward spiral started when I left Vanguard without consulting the Lord. I mean, it's fair to say that I was trying to do everything without God now. And I was trying to do everything on my own terms. I did feel guilty at the time for closing the doors, but at the same time, I was also looking for some baseball recognition. So at the end of that spring, it came time to signing with the Oakland A's. They called me up and said, Tim, we're not going to offer you a major league, we're not going to offer you a contract. I didn't go pitch for the Chatham A's in the Cape Cod League. I didn't have a chance to go to Oklahoma and pitch for Oral Roberts because my arm was dead. Ultimately, I found myself on my knees again. And I asked the Lord, what am I supposed to do? I mean, everything seemed like it was just blowing up. And he said, Tim, I never told you to leave Vanguard. I want you to go back to Vanguard. So I humbled myself. I called Coach Emmert, who was still here. Thankfully, he said, I'll take you back. I couldn't throw hard anymore. And that spring, which is the team that Jeff was telling you about earlier, the 1985 team, that whole fall, my arm never bounced back. That next spring, my arm never bounced back. And we were going to go to the College World Series. And Coach Emmert wanted to keep me off that postseason roster. As a matter of fact, we had better pitchers that were better than me. I'll be honest with you. I was the last guy on the totem pole. Well, unbeknownst to him, Kelly had told me the whole time, Tim, you need to see an acupuncturist. Because I was seeing every single orthopedic, I was seeing chiropractors, I was seeing neurologists, I was seeing everybody trying to figure out what was wrong with my shoulder. But my wife told me, you need to see an acupuncturist. So unbeknownst to my coach here, off the side, 3 days a week, we picked out a guy in the Yellow Pages up in Huntington Beach next to the apartment that I was living in. And I went and saw him for 3 days a week for 3 weeks. I mean, they took these horsehairs and they put one here in my elbow, one in my bicep, one in my shoulder, and one in my pec. And every week, I mean, these things were about this long. Every week, they would put them in deeper and deeper and deeper. And the coach ultimately did take me to the College World Series. And in the final game of that year, up in Lewiston, Idaho, this was my junior year. I mean, I had a chance to pitch in a very meaningless game. We were losing big, and he was out of pitchers. So he said, Tim, you're going to pitch the last 3 innings. Well, no one's scouting like I don't now. And knowing that I was throwing 92 to 95 miles an hour at Golden West when my arm was healthy, I was back to throwing 92 to 93 miles an hour. All good, but the problem was I was a complete forgotten. Scouts weren't calling me. The draft came. I went completely undrafted. So the only option I had now is go back for my senior year at Vanguard. Now I'm a 24-year-old senior. I mean, guys, 24 and you're a senior? That's okay. We had a guy on the team that was 28. But the other part, but he's a cool guy. He's a good guy. But when you're aspiring, exactly. Well, now I've got my back against the wall. So I go back for my senior year, and I'll try to wrap this up here as shortly as I can here. I go back for my senior year, and I had my best year statistically. I mean, I had my only successful year collegiately. And I ended up becoming I was the MVP of the GSAC. I was second team All-American. But when the draft came on draft day, I thought, okay, but the problem was I had only spoken to one scout all spring. And when the draft came 3 days later, day one goes by, no phone call, no internet too, either back then. That's how old I am. No internet, no updates on the internet, no Twitter accounts, no feedback, whatever. So no phone call. Day one goes by, no phone call. Day two goes by, no phone call. Day three goes by. the draft goes by. I had a scout call me from the Seattle Mariners after the third day. He said, "Have you heard anything?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Okay." He said, "Get in your car. I want you to drive 190 miles up to Santa Maria, and you're going to pitch against the Santa Maria Indians." Now, I already had a successful senior year. I had already proven what I could do. I already proved that I was healthy, but I didn't even at all flinch. I got in my car and I drove 190 miles. I pitched against the Santa Maria Indians, who won the Wichita tournament the summer before, and I faced guys from all the Division I programs around the country. Pete Incaviglia was on that team. Robin Ventura was on that team. These were players that played during the summer up there. That's where they're from. And I ended up pitching 7 innings that night, and I struck out 14 guys. They told me, "Get back in your car, drive 190 miles back to your apartment." So I did a 400 round trip mile to Santa Maria and Huntington Beach to showcase that I was healthy. The very next day, I got a phone call from Bill Tracy, who happened to be the first scout who ever gave me my first opportunity to pitch professionally. I signed with the Seattle Mariners as a non-drafted senior out of college. You want to talk about the 11th hour? That was the 11th hour for me. Well, now I'm going to speed this through because I'm not going to tell you about my career, because if you really want to read anything about my story and look me up, you'll see it anywhere on the internet. And, you know, Google Danny Knobler, Bleacher Reports, Do God Reports by Mark Ellis, and they've done some stories about this. Well, for the next 6 years, by the way, I ended up playing in the minor leagues, making the bare minimum. I was making $3,000 a year. Jeff, you'll be impressed with this. I was making $6,000 at the peak of my 6-year minor league career. I'm 30 years old. I have 2 kids now. I have a wife who stood by my side. I have no idea why, because I had put her through 4 years of college and I put her through 6 years in the minor leagues. I'm 30. I don't have a real job except I'm a minor leaguer chasing this wild dream. Well, this is where God shows himself and how sometimes it isn't on our own timetable. I want you to know something. I was 30 years old when I got a call to pitch in the big leagues. He is so good, he even let me pitch in front of all my Vanguard alumni. He let me pitch in front of all my family up there at Anaheim Stadium. My first start was in Anaheim Stadium against the Toronto Blue Jays. The first hitter I faced was against Devon White, and I ended up throwing 3 fastballs right by him, and I struck out my first major league hitter. And what I really like to tell guys is that, I mean, the true testimony in all of this is it's not me, it's God. I want you to know there's an old expression in life that the devil's in the details. But in my experience, I'm going to tell you something. God is in all the details in my story. By stepping out in faith, I mean, I've been more blessed than you can imagine, guys. I got 2 years and 1 day of Major League service time. I qualified for pension starting at 45 years for the rest of my life. And when I die, my wife is actually going to be able to take that benefit. And it's not small, it's big, it's huge, it's a real blessing. And, you know, so can I just go ahead and just tell you guys, let me just finish up with this thought, because I probably have exceeded my time. My story is so long, it's so many details in it, and I really wanted to share as much as I could to give you a feel for, you know, what you got to go through sometimes is trust the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on your own understanding. I know you've all heard this. Seek his will and you will find, and he'll direct your path. For he knows the plans that he has for you. He plans to prosper you. He plans to help you in taking you on your path. And here's one of my favorite scriptures is, take delight in the Lord, Psalm 37:4, because he knows the desires of your heart. Credos that I live by is follow your heart because he's preparing you for something. He knows your heart. And trust in him. Stay away from all the naysayers. And finally, I started out by asking these questions. Do you have a dream? Do you know that you've got a gift that God has given you? And do you know what your purpose is? So my encouragement to you is to step out in faith, take a risk, trust in God, and lastly, you can live your dream as I am, And don't think for one moment that you can't make a life out of your dream. So I want to say thank you, God bless. Feel free to Facebook me at Tim N. Kelly Fortugno. These guys here know my information. I would love to connect with anybody here that wants to further a conversation, because unfortunately we don't have the time to, I can't come up and shake everybody's hands, which is what I really want to do right now. But because I'm really excited for you guys, because you're me 30 years ago. Actually, this is my 30th anniversary. I was sitting right there and looking out this way. I did have a dream, and I hope that you guys will reach out to me, connect with me somehow, and I would absolutely love and be honored to maybe establish some kind of communication. It doesn't have to be baseball related, guys. My story is so much more layered than just baseball and sports, although that's a big part of what we do. So anyways, thank you. I appreciate it. Rhett?